president says no nuclear threat. I'm new to nukes, so help me understand what that means, because by my estimation, North Korea's still got 20 to 60 nukes. They've got missiles that are operational, and they have chemical, biological, and artillery weapons pointing at South Korea. So to me, that doesn't sound like no nuclear threat, and Mike Pompeo is headed to Seoul to sell this idea.
So, Stephanie, congratulations. You've just proven yourself a better nuclear analyst than the President of the United States, because he evidently did not do that arithmetic before claiming that there was no more nuclear threat. And I would just reinforce the point that the summit statements that they signed contain language even more vacuous than earlier agreements North Korea has signed. So I think you're right to be skeptical that this really amounts to anything. In fact, the only nuclear issue that was really affected by the summit was that the President of the United States has just demonstrated the enormous value that crossing the nuclear threshold has for poor repressive governments, because they get the undivided attention and affection of the President of the United States.
And that is what is amazing to me. I remember Obama signs a multilateral agreement to curb Iran's nuclear capabilities, and the GOP says he's legitimized a dictator. And now the president begins to do such a thing with Kim Jong-un, and the GOP is saying he's saving the world. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, hypocrisy and moral cowardice is the short version. It's a demonstration that this is a party. It's really not even a party. It's a cult of personality. So whatever.
That works.
Well, it works for his party. We'll see whether it works politically for him in the midterms.
He is the president, so it appears to be working.
Well, it worked for him in 2016, right? But in the end, we'll have to see, because reality ultimately prevails. But look, I agree with this analysis. This summit was a farce. I think the question here is to try and keep it from becoming a catastrophe. It's not only that all of the concessions were front-loaded, it is that Kim, having sized Trump up, is going to think that he can get away with a huge amount. There are historical parallels here. Khrushchev and Kennedy in '61 met, and Khrushchev thought that Kennedy was weak, and that eventually led to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Beyond that, Donald Trump is in a delusional world. Now, that's fine if he lived in that world alone, but he is...
But that delusional world that he's created, the rest of the Republican Party is standing by him, and the rest of the country is living with the consequences.
That is exactly the problem. If it was just his own delusional world and he were a businessman in New York, that would be one thing, but he's the president, and he's drawing us into that delusional world. And people are treating him, actually, I think, much too gingerly. He is coming apart. And if you combine the summit with Kim Jong-un in Singapore with the wreckage of the G7, this is like an inverted world where Canada is told, and the Prime Minister of Canada is supposed to burn in hell, and is betrayed, and, and that he's stuck a knife in the back of Donald Trump. We're fracturing our alliances, and Donald Trump is not only giving away these concessions, he's essentially the mouthpiece he is to Kim Jong-un what Baghdad Bob was to Saddam Hussein. He is making the case morally and politically for the most repressive dictator on the planet.
Wow, those are some strong words. Mark, I want to read the way North Korean news agencies describe the deal. Kim Jong-un and Trump had the shared recognition to the effect that it is important to abide by the principle of step-by-step and simultaneous action in achieving peace, stability, and denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Do you think the United States and North Korea see this the same way?
I mean, if you listen to Donald Trump somewhat, I mean, I think if you juxtapose with what you just read with what the Canadian press, what the French press, what the British press, what the German press said coming out of the G7, you have what Peter just said. And I also, to underscore something Peter just said, reality prevails. I mean, what we're talking about here are headlines and spin and photo ops. These are all short-term, ephemeral readings of what was a momentous event by any measure. I don't think anyone would be surprised if in 2 weeks, 2 months, this whole thing went completely south, because you are basing this completely on a very, very, I would say, unreliable access of an unstable dictator, and what his ego thinks and what his ego, will lead him to do. And you just sort of wonder, what is this partnership made of?
Well, it makes you wonder, how do authoritarian leaders feel about this? Kori, let's talk about China and Russia, because months ago, this exact plan is what China suggested happen. And I believe it was Nikki Haley who said no way. The Wall Street Journal has reported that Putin may have given Trump the idea of ending these war games.
Well, it does suggest that we have underestimated the risk of our adversaries, what the White House described as the return of great power competition. The deal we just made with North Korea is going to be celebrated in Moscow and in Beijing.
But could that be because the president doesn't view China, Russia, or North Korea as our adversaries? He thinks the EU and Canada are.
Well, I agree with Peter's assessment of the enormous damage the president has done to America's alliance relationships, because I think the president just fundamentally does not believe that standing side by side with allies is a source of strength for the United States. And the way he treats the Chinese, the Russians, the North Koreans, and cannot seem to get along with the Canadians, the Germans, and the French, is a world upside down, and it's genuinely damaging to America's security for the president to be reckless and behave in this way.
All right, but take a different perspective, because we knew we were going to get something different out of President Trump. Many people said it's so crazy it just might work, and North Korea was a massive threat. That's what Obama told him. This is our biggest issue. And I want to share what Trump specifically said about how his rhetoric led to this summit.
Well, I think without the rhetoric, we wouldn't have been here. I really believe that. You know, we did sanctions and all of the things that you would do. But I think without the rhetoric, you know, other administrations, I don't want to get specific on that, but they had a policy of silence. If they said something very bad, very threatening and horrible, just don't answer. That's not the answer. That's not what you have to do. So I think the rhetoric, I hated to do it. Sometimes I felt foolish doing it. But we had no choice.
Is he wrong here? Because on some level, Trump does understand Kim Jong-un. They're similar guys. As absurd as it is to see Dennis Rodman wearing a pot coin shirt, this could work. I mean, they are all similar beings.
No, it won't work, and he is wrong. Look, the supposition for those who are praising Trump is that it's better to have a summit than not, and that will inevitably be better. That's simply not true. Neville Chamberlain could have made exactly the claim Donald Trump did when he met with Hitler in '38, right? Hitler said wonderful things, so did Chamberlain. Those things don't mean anything. What matters in the end, Mark alluded to it, is reality. The reason why this can be dangerous, not, as I said, not just a farce, but a catastrophe, is because what Trump is setting in motion can eventually make North Korea more aggressive and stronger. It's going to weaken the sanctions. If the argument that Trump is proposing is true, and he's now said it, which is that they're not a nuclear threat, what's the argument for sanctions? What happens if he set up a dynamic where we withdraw American troops from South Korea, which could eventually lead to conflict? So if you believe simply getting together for 24 hours and talking is some kind of great achievement, then the Trump view is right. But that's not how diplomacy works. It's not how the real world works. And you have to see this in the arc of events. And this is going to be seen as something that I think, from a historical perspective, is going to make things more dangerous, not less.
Well, look at the way the administration has been staffed. It's almost as though, and I said it yesterday, Trump thinks diplomacy is for dodos and wimps. It's not how real men run business. But is the argument here, Mark, then, it's not that President Trump was the only one who could get a summit like this, but the only one who would take a summit like this? I
think it's the latter. I mean, I think Barack Obama, I think George W. Bush, I think Bill Clinton, they all could have had summits. I mean, it's not a question of like whether the North Korean leader is willing to sit down. I mean, we talk about, or the president talks about this as this great triumphant moment. We wouldn't have gotten here if it weren't for my inflamed rhetoric. I mean, what is here exactly? I mean, I think the premise that we are all monumentally much safer and North Korea is such a great, like, defanged threat is very faulty. I mean, I think, again, we're going to see what happens in the next few months, but right now I'm not so convinced that this is such a safer place than it was 2 weeks ago.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.